This is a podcast from the Fitzwilliam Museum, Cambridge.
I'm Timothy Potts, the director of the Fitzwilliam Museum, and welcome to From the Land of the Golden Fleece, Tomb Treasures from Ancient Georgia. We're very pleased to have this spectacular exhibition at the Fitzwilliam Museum. It is the first to be shown in this country on the culture of ancient Georgia, and it focuses on the material from the most spectacular archaeological site in the country, the site of Vani. Ancient Georgia at the time of the Greeks and Romans, which is the subject of this exhibition, shows us a very interesting combination of outside influences from the classical world, but also a very important and rich indigenous culture, which has its roots in Caucasus going back through the millennia before the period of the 5th through 1st centuries BC. To the Greeks, ancient Georgia was known as Colchis, most famous today as the place to which Jason led the Argonauts in search of the Golden Fleece. This is the story that most schoolchildren know, and probably perhaps the only thing they know about ancient Georgia. And it reflects what was, though, an historical reality, and that was the extreme importance of gold and gold working to the economy and to the culture of ancient Georgia. Indeed, the Golden Fleece may itself have been a way of capturing small particles of gold in the rivers in which gold could be found in ancient Georgia, so it may not be an entirely mythical object. Chronologically, the period that this exhibition covers is from the 5th and 6th centuries BC through to the 1st century BC, when the site of Vani was destroyed. During this period, it lies on the periphery of the major empires of the day, the great Achaemenid Persian Empire to the south and the land of the Greeks, Greece itself in the Aegean Islands, somewhat to the west. To the north lay the vast steppe lands in which the Scythians and other nomadic peoples inhabited, and all of these cultures have left something of a mark on the Georgians, who absorbed influences in their art and culture from the worlds around them. The site of Vani was excavated initially from the late 19th century, but the major period of scientific excavation has been from the 1940s onwards. And these excavations have uncovered a range of sanctuaries. Clearly, Vani was a major cultic center. Some installations which particularly seem to be concerned with the production of wine and the worship of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine. And as well as these cult centers, most famously, it's been the site where have been discovered a series of elite burials with presumably the elite members of Vani society laid to rest with extraordinary amounts of gold jewelry and other tomb offerings, vessels of silver, bronze, gold, and so on, dating from the 5th century, the 4th century, and the 3rd century BC. We know from the ancient Greek and Roman authors that Colchis was a rich center of gold production and metalworking, and it's been very interesting to see this absolutely confirmed by the excavations, particularly at Vani from this period. The exhibition is one that will be enjoyed, I think, not only for the spectacular gold work that you see, but also because it tells this story of how a culture which we really don't know very much of from the ancient texts has come to life through the archaeological world in an extraordinarily vivid way, and allows us to see also how these objects seem to have functioned within ancient Colchian society, the rituals that related particularly to wine. And it's something we see very much in the culture of Georgia still today, where wine plays a very major part. And we see the Colchians interacting and absorbing from the Greeks some of their mythology, some of their iconography, but also very consciously retaining a sense of their own artistic tradition. Well, we're now in the gallery, and ahead of us is one of the most spectacular objects in the whole exhibition, this life-size sculpture of a male, probably an athlete of some kind. Probably the first thing you notice about it is that it is so thoroughly classical, so Greek in style. This does reflect the period of Vani's history in the 3rd, 2nd and 1st centuries BC, when much of the material culture at the site comes from Greece, both imports of ceramics, bronzes, sculptures and other things, and local imitations. This object, although it is so purely Greek in style, was probably actually made in Colchis and may even have been made in Vani. We know that from the way in which it was cast. Although the style is of the high classical period of the 5th century BC, the period of the Parthenon and other great monuments of the age of Pericles. This was probably one of those imitations or adaptations of a 5th century work which was made a few centuries later. It was broken up during the sack of Varni around 50 BC and was found in this very damaged condition without its head and arms and the lower legs. But what has survived is of such extraordinary quality that it really is a testament to the quality of the bronze workers and the sculptors working in Colchis at this period. Interestingly, the excavators also found at Varni evidence of a foundry with many fragments of damaged or broken up sculptures of bronze which were being probably recast or reworked or repaired. So there was a very active metalworking industry in the city and in this region, not only in the precious metals, silver and gold, but also in bronze work. The next object we're going to look at is this figurine with gold jewellery attachments. And it's striking how different this is in style from the torso that we just talked about. This is very much more stylized. It's totally unclassical in form. There's no central naturalism to it. It's essentially a stick figure. And this reflects the fact that it derives very much from the local Georgian tradition of metalwork and of art generally, which goes back some centuries and indeed millennia into the 2nd and 3rd millennium BC, and involves a much more stylized approach to the representation both of human figures and animals and the natural world generally. It was found buried in a small pit just outside one of the numerous sanctuaries in Varni, in this case dating to the 3rd century BC. It's not absolutely sure what these figures represent. About 6 of them were found. They're all buried in pits, as it were, replicating human burials. Sometimes they're covered with terracotta tiles, as this one was, as if they're being protected in the same way that a tomb covering would have protected the bodies in real burials. Some have suggested that these may be priests. They have their hands slightly forward often, as if offering or appealing to a god. They're often buried face down, as if they're perhaps in some way approaching or appealing to a chthonic, an underworld deity. But because we don't have texts from this period which discuss in any way the local culture or religion, this is really quite speculative. Interestingly, they adorn them with gold jewellery, so they're represented very much wearing the same sorts of apparel that the wealthy elite of Varni themselves were buried with in the lavish burials of this same period. Next we're going to look at a head, a spectacular and beautiful, quite dramatic bronze head, which probably comes from a large cauldron, maybe a wine cauldron in fact. It shows a head of the Greek god Pan. He has his mouth open, his eyes wide, in a rather expressive, perhaps ecstatic state, which suits his sort of bestial character in Greek mythology. And Pan is one of the figures that often accompanies the god Dionysus, the god of wine. And this is very appropriate for Varni because this was a site and this was in a culture in ancient Georgia in which wine played a very major role, certainly as part of their ritual as well as in their everyday life. And an installation has been found at Varni which seems to have been devoted to viticulture, the production of wine,